Well, people forget too that CIAA was one of the places that revolutionized day parties.
Not revolutionized, started. Started. Like seriously. So, 100% sure. Period. So.
I know I'm not the only one that watched that Frackaneckle Bull with R. Kelly on Lifetime. Did y'all see that? Frackaneckle Bull. That's the only way that I can describe it. I felt
the anger that I felt when watching that, that documentary. Because I have a daughter. I got a 23-month-old daughter, so
congratulations.
Appreciate that. If I could not fathom being in that type of situation and having something like that happen to my daughter and my family. So I can't understand, I don't know if it's something from a mental health standpoint or psychological, but it's R. Kelly in our household is banned.
I wasn't even gonna watch it. I only watched it because I knew I was coming here. Because I already knew that he was trashed 20 years ago.
Yeah, he's been trashed.
I mean, all of us heard the rumors. Some people saw the videotape. But I think that when you watch the special night after night, and then person after person after person after person, over and over and over again with the same story of manipulation, control, and physical and sexual and emotional abuse, it just kind of became undeniable after that. Like, I was just, I don't know, I kind of was done after night one. But I kept watching it like, this can't be worse.
But I'm wondering who didn't know this, though. That's what's mind-boggling. Is like, I'm happy that people are fired up about it now. But for me, I'm like, I've been known this. Everyone's been known this. Why are we acting like we're just like finding out now?
You know, the problem is with R. Kelly is we save you, but you come back as the average fan, the fan that supported you, the fan that bought the album, the tickets for years. You came back and did the same thing we told you not to. We told you don't date the young girls. He's popping up with 19-year-old girlfriends. We told you don't do this, don't do that. You got girls coming out saying I'm locked up in the basement. Jesus, like what's going on? Everything is a big mystery, and guess what? He doesn't say nothing.
There's a time when it becomes insult to injury. It's one thing for your loved one to go through hardship, but it's another thing for your loved one to go through hardship and that person is not being held accountable. Instead, they are being celebrated. And that's what we did to R. Kelly. He committed a crime and continued to commit multiple crimes. And instead of us holding him accountable for one, we celebrated him.
But this type of stuff happens every day in households, you know what I mean? Across America, like, have you guys ever experienced or seen somebody or heard somebody like messing with underage people, or whether it be a man messing with an underage girl, or a man messing with an underage man, or a woman, or vice versa? You know, it happens often. What has been?
It's such a double standard because right now, if I walk in this room right now and there's a little young girl in here, and she's, I don't know, let's just say she's 10 years old, long hair, beautiful, and I say to her, oh girl, when you grow up, I'm gonna get you. I'm looked at as the worst pedophile preying on a young girl, correct? But in the black household, at least where I grew up at, it was always the older lady who looked at the younger boy like, you're gonna be a heartbreaker when you get older, boy.
Think about when you were 13. When you're 13 and 14, the only thing you want to be is grown.
Right.
You know, and you want the world to see you as grown.
I remember sneaking eyeliner to school. And my father came into the school. It was like, what's that on your eyes? I was like, oh, just like that.
I had the sweater on with the crop top under.
Right, yeah.
I was like, they'll never know.
They knew. Right. They knew. But even before social media, you know, you would hear stories about mothers with boyfriends that came onto the, you know, the young girl, and mothers not willing to believe it or willing to brand their daughters a liar. Right. Like, what is it? I just don't get this. What is it about young black girls in particular? Remember a couple of years ago with the Find Out Girls campaign when we found out it was like dozens of girls missing in the DMV area? Hundreds. And like nobody did anything about it.
They didn't care about the black girl.
Race plays a factor in the ways in which women and young girls are treated in the media, not just when it comes to sexual exploitation, but when it comes to things regarding violence or crime. A few years ago, a police officer pinned down a young black girl at a pool party in Texas, and the outcry that came from people who were non-people of color was she should have just listened to a police officer. A lot of times when it comes to crimes, the first thing that is looked at is your skin color, unfortunately, and the color of your skin often determines what and how you are treated by law enforcement. So that's something that we need to face, and we need to face it head on. It's not just R. Kelly. If you watch any mainstream outlet, you see the ways in which these people are depicted. So yes, race plays a factor, and it's not in a positive way.
Contradicts the entirety of American history. Of course these girls are not valued. They're not valued any more than their mothers or fathers were valued. They're not lost. They don't exist. One of my favorite Snick songs, I said, what made you write the Ballad of Medgar Evers? And what made you write In the Mississippi River? Because in that song, those young people, they say, you know, they found them with their heads cut off, with their hands tied. And they sing the names, in the Yazoo River, in the Tallahatchie River. They naming them, in the Mississippi River. Why? Because you went looking for those two white boys, and then you found us. She said, you know when I thought about that song? When they went into Rock Creek Park looking for Chandra Levy, and they found all the black bodies they never went looking for, the homeless people, and the people, those people not valuable. So of course black girls are not valuable. They're not human beings in America, never have been. They have never been human in America. And they will never matter in America until we make them matter.
I was thinking about how gross it is, society's obsession with fame, you know, because, you know, as big as R. Kelly was, like in the 90s and the early 2000s, a lot of this stuff was going on when he kind of cooled off some, you know, so it's like, it's not like he's the guy at the top of the charts. He's now the old dude with the leather jersey that say Chi-Town on it, with a mask on, but yet you still got people who are like doing anything and everything in their power to be next to this person, and I was like, man, it's crazy. And my big takeaway was how everybody on the internet and everybody that I know is acting like canceling his shows and stopping his streaming is going to fix the problem. Like nobody's talking about getting this man help.
What was interesting to me about the Surviving R. Kelly piece was how cavalier they were about going to get girls from the high school. Like, and what was interesting was these guys who helped him get girls from the high school said it like I was just doing what he asked me to do. Right? I didn't check no IDs. So I know guys whose egos were so small that when they come home from college, the first place they go is not to college, they go to the high school.
I was thinking about that.
So
Facts.
Because cats gotta feed ego.
I'm the man.
So sometimes it's not a sexual sickness. Sometimes it's such a low ego that where can I go to feed the ego?
When I was at that 16, 17 age, like when men would be trying to talk to you, but they don't really ask your age. And so I feel like you've already kind of talking to them on the phone and things like that. And you're at the age, you're at 16, you don't want to tell your mother you're talking to like a 22-year-old.
Exactly.
Even though like now you're like, oh, it's not that big of a difference as adults, like the gap there. But when you're 16, what are you going to do? Well, when you're 22, what are you going to do with a 16-year-old? Like, what can a 16-year-old offer you?
Yeah.
Like, you know, we're not even on the same wave.
So that's oftentimes what is missing in our community is that we don't have those father figures or the uncle figures. They're there, but they might not be giving the real to our girls.
Comfortable with having the conversation.
Yes.
That's what we have to be.
And having the conversation in a way that respects this young lady. Not in a way that's like, oh, don't be fast, don't be hoish, don't do this, but more so like I know you're going to be dating and I know that you're going to be seeing this young man, but know that this is what he wants or this is how you should be courted, and actually have a conversation.
A real conversation about a realistic view about female sexuality.
Yes, and what a relationship is, not how not to be a hoe. Because that's their biggest fear.
Why is that the biggest
how
goal
not to
in life
be a
to not
hoe.
be a hoe?
Please don't break it.
How many reformed hoes do we know that went on their lips?
That is the biggest fear. I don't know.
I'm a parent of two daughters. Both are still in their teens. Yeah. So hearing the narrative about exploitation of females is very unsettling. It's not one that I ascribe to. I talk against it, which is why I used his language in class to talk about how one should never allow their lower self to govern and guide them, and that gets you into a lot of trouble. And then when you look at, again, the reduction of human to material, that is that an object for manipulation for personal gain is one that is a very self-serving relationship. And so I talk about often to students and also to my children that if there is someone in a relationship with you, but they're not relating to you, they simply want something from you, even when it becomes sexual, it's a masturbatory relationship with somebody being present. And so we can often have these self-gratifying relationships that really are not about the relationship at all. It's really about self-satisfaction. So we see that narrative playing itself out around the complexity of this particular situation of R. Kelly.
That's the part that made it so sick. He was preying on young girls who wanted a future in the music business. And he would sell the moms and the dads. I remember talking to the dad asking, what made you allow your daughter at 16 to fly to Atlanta? He said, at the same time, my daughter really wants to be an artist. Right. So as a dad or a mom, I want to support my kid. Now for me, I would have went with the girl.
Exactly.
So you say this, right? Everybody says this, and this is some points that my homeboys were saying as well. That I would have went with him, right? But we're not, but just period, right? Because R. Kelly is not the only person that sold somebody a dream, right? And they winded up trusting their kids to go somewhere. And R. Kelly has been the person that come out to speak of, that people have come out to tell their story about it. But don't get it twisted. I guarantee you this happens a lot more often than we talk about, right? So my question to you is, I think that not in question. I think the thing that we leave out and that we don't take in consideration is the social economic situation, right? Absolutely. Because it's so easy to say, hey, I would have went this. I would have went out there with him. But how you gonna do that when you got a house full of kids and then now you gotta work and you gotta provide for them?
No, because if you can fly her out there, you can fly us out there.
I'm with you, but I'm saying everybody else says that they would, but it's more complicated.
But I think you're right from the standpoint that people who are in positions of poverty take higher risks. It's why you see more poor kids that still let their kids play football than wealthy kids. Poverty creates a desperation that says I am willing to do something that rich people have options not to do.
Humans have just 2 or 3 basic needs, and one, of course, is water, food, and then some even include sex in the conversation. Everything else outside of that is simply something that's used to gain either one of those 3 things. And so we see that that's clearly the case here, that something is used for some personal gain, and underneath that is this idea of how am I identified as a person, or how do I become a person? How do I become human? How do I become honored as a human being outside of not having these things? And so we associate humanity with how much money you have, or we associate manhood with how many women that you can have sexually, or we associate value and worth with even the kind of foods that we consume. And so the reality is that this idea of social economic status influencing the process, it influences almost every relationship that we engage in.
They've done studies where the view of black girls, they always say that black girls project older. The people read them as older. And when they give them scenarios, they'll do, groups or whatever, where they'll do scenarios, and they'll have a black girl and a girl that's not of color, and they'll assume that the black girl is older or that she was more aware of her actions.
By the time we have to grow up faster.
They have to grow up faster. And why is that, though? I think it's so frustrating sometimes.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating. But I think that kind of leads to situations like with the R. Kelly situation or the Aaliyah situation, because I've heard it time and time again. She knew, or she knew, or her parents knew. Why would they? You think they knew?
Yeah. I mean, well, from my understanding, he was helping her career, right? Her end. But it's just not right. She wasn't. Her parents knew. There's no way that they wouldn't know. I mean, come on.
But I feel like they want your kids to make it so bad,
yeah,
and they're kind of like they're blindfolded. They're in the bird box.
At the same time, her uncle was Barry Hankerson. Okay, so he's already in the industry, and they're probably thinking that that's a layer of defense. Like we've got an uncle figure here, and this was happening under his nose. Like he trusted, like he's not gonna have his, baby niece with a pedophile, but he did, but he didn't even know.
But did he not know? Because I feel like everybody
I mean,
around
the minute
him.
that came out, that marriage was annulled.
That's true.
That marriage was annulled, and she was far away from him, and it was done.
I just can't see how you don't really know what's right underneath your nose. Like, you're in the studio with them. Like, you see the reaction and his body language. I don't feel like R. Kelly hid anything.
But you gotta remember, this is
but
the
the
first
narration.
time that we're even hearing about R. Kelly with Aaliyah. Now, these other parents that are coming around in 2011 and 2013 and 14, what talking about? I brought my 17-year-old to a concert, and then he pulled
Because
my
he was found
17-year-old
Right.
on stage.
Yeah.
Are
And
you
just let him
crazy?
go backstage. Like, I didn't understand that part.
You shouldn't even been at the concert.
That's true,
Much
too.
less bring
What
your
you
daughter
doing?
on the
Why you talking
concert.
about sex?
Much less he said, let's bring him on.
You know, we call that the triple P diagnosis. It's called piss poor parenting. So like,
What happened in the circles around R. Kelly, what did or didn't happen, to me is something that speaks to black community. And so, you know, I'm not a trier of fact. I'm not a judge. But I think about the R. Kelly situation, and I think to myself, how have black people, this is always my question, how have black people resolved these kind of issues over time and space? And it seems to me that these type of issues have been resolved internally for millennia, not just decades and centuries and generations, but millennia. And having a sister, having a mother, having nieces, having nephews, uncles, fathers, if my sister or if my niece had been one of the people who was at R. Kelly's house, you may be doing this interview from the penitentiary, brother. And not only am I not in the minority, my question is, what kind of narrative creates the idea that black people don't do that?
He did his dirt. Everybody always said if you do your dirt trying to hide, and look when you get caught, it's always way more suspicious. But he did his dirt in plain sight. Like, I was talking to my wife, and she was like, "That was R. Kelly on Aaliyah's album cover in the back, lurking."
Yes.
I had to look that up. I was like, "Yo, he's literally standing on the wall back, looking like a creep from behind."
Out of focus.
Yeah, out of focus.
Well, I'm one of those people that once I heard about the tape, and I might be one of the few people who never saw it. But once I heard about it and I understood that it was a 14-year-old child, I just stopped dealing with R. Kelly. Like, I stopped supporting him then.
So you stopped supporting him, but if you came into a club I was DJing there at that moment, I played Step in the Name of Love, did you stop dancing?
I mean, I'm not a dancer anyway, so I get what you're saying.
It was a party of life.
Hey, let me ask you this though. So this is another thing like that we're not really talking about. A lot of this stuff happened before the 24-hour news cycle in the age of social media. So if R. Kelly happened in 2015 and it was like, and it went viral, then people probably would have pressed down because things are being reported a different way now. Absolutely. But since it happened all the way back in the 90s and the early 2000s, and you know, everybody didn't see the tape. If the tape came out now, everybody would see the tape. It'd be on your Twitter feed 30 times.
Time out. Everybody didn't see the tape.
No, this is what I'm saying. I'm saying if the tape came out around 2015 versus the tape people who saw the tape, you had to go to a flea market or somewhere. You had to buy. I don't even know if it was DVDs or not. Like, I don't know. It was VHS, so it's like you had to go. So you had to put effort into it.
The only person I know that said they haven't seen the tape.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Like, I couldn't even imagine, like, I'm a dad's dad. Like, my kids are my life. So I couldn't even imagine a fan thinking that something like this happened to one of my kids.
My upbringing growing up, I come from a Nigerian household, and so my parents don't play. I could never be left with a man alone. They didn't care what type of gifts I was trying to explore. If I was going to be a singer, they're like, okay, I'll be right there with you. They didn't care. And that mentality is something that I carry with me and my children right now. I do believe, I remember there was this one comment from one of the mothers that said, she was 18, she was an adult, so I just let her go. I prayed for her and I wished her the best. As a Nigerian, you're not an adult. You could be 35 and you're still a kid.
Luckily, my mother was always very protective of me and my sister. Yeah. So we had rules growing up. Like, there were, you don't sit on people's laps, you don't spend the night at people's houses. Yeah. Like, she checked out everybody, and we still call her worst case scenario. Because, like, legit, if you go into Walmart, she'd be like, be careful. Somebody could be hiding under your car. Like, it's 8 o'clock at night. I'm grown. Like, look, I'm time enough for anybody that's trying to come. I'm from Baltimore, too, right? You know, but she was, listen, but because of that, you know, she kind of put a little bit of hypervigilance in me where I was always, you know, I did things that other teenage girls did too.
So the part that really struck me was like, from a therapist perspective, it's like he thought he was going to protect his daughter. He did everything. He got off of work. He went down to the hotel, all this other stuff. And before we judge these fathers, it's like, man, think about what they go through, you know? Because he thought he was going to protect his daughter, and then now he has to swallow that pill of vulnerability of like, yo, I didn't do it good enough, and now she's here. Like, as a father, that part ate me apart. Like, I was devastated. Like, I would feel like I failed my daughter, and I don't know how I would deal with that. And this is me as a therapist talking, you know?
So here's the part that's so scary about that. When I had the dad on the show and I asked him that, I said, so my first question was, what made you take your, because she was 16 at the time, what made you take your 16-year-old daughter to an R. Kelly concert with your wife? And he explained to me his daughter tried to commit suicide, things like that. But on top of that, I said, at the point when R. Kelly pointed to your daughter and said, come on stage. Now, it was him, his wife, and his daughter. Wife looks like she may be 30, pretty face, nice body. The 16-year-old girl that came on stage, she looked 14. Looked like she had on a school dress. I mean, she just looked like a little kid. I said, at that point, as a dad, at that point, you didn't know he was trying to actually give your daughter a career, or now we know the worst. At what point, when he said, and I'm singing Bump and Grind, and I look out in the crowd and I say, I want her on stage. As a dad, what made you say, go ahead up there, baby? Because me as a dad, if it's me, my wife, and my daughter, and I'm at a Trey Songz show, and he says, I want her, go somewhere else.
I just don't, I'm like you. I don't want to victim blame a father who's already dealing with enough, but there was enough information about R. Kelly at the time to make you feel at least uncomfortable with giving him access to your daughter.
There's a lot of people that were sitting back critiquing him also from the perspective of how they were taking the legal route to handle things, you know what I'm saying? And we always talk about, yo, if that was me, like, cause when I was watching the movie, I'm like, yo, if I flew all the way out to Chicago, ain't no door gonna stop me from getting in that studio. Like, I'm gonna break the door down, I'm gonna go through the window or something. When you throwing those rocks, I'm gonna be climbing up a ladder to go through that window. If I flew all the way out here for that, this structure is not stopping me from getting there. We just want to, I might lose it all, but I'm gonna gain the one thing I came for, right? But a lot of people was critiquing the fathers about them taking the legal route. Can you say as a father, as a father or aspiring to be fathers, that you would have took that same legal route?
No, you know what scares me? What scares me is he was smart enough at a certain point to date girls young enough to be young, but old enough to be legal. Right. And as a dad, what scares me is the thought that if my daughter starts to date a dude that I don't like, and she in love with him, at some point there's only so much I can do legally. And my hope is that I've been enough of a dad that she'll listen. But at some point, your daughter can tell you to go to hell. Right. And in many cases, these parents were dealing with legally aged children. You hear what I said? Mm-hmm. They were legal, but they were children who made decisions that legally they couldn't fight. And that was, to me, the Machiavellian, just despicable brilliance of his treachery, because he stopped messing with 15-year-olds, and he started dating with 17.
By the time it came out, you're 18.
But y'all not answering my question.
But even 17.
My question. I understand what he did, and I understand what makes it
work
difficult.
on them and tell it, and then had them cut their family off once they became 18.
So let me answer your question.
So he had 3 or 4 years to mentally control them.
So right now, I would have said something differently before I talked to the dad. So when the dad was on my show, I said to him, I'm watching the thing and you got your wife throwing the rocks up there. Why you ain't just bust through the door, take a gun and shoot him in his head and take your daughter? Because that's what I'm thinking. The street mentality to me is saying, if somebody harms my daughter, my job as a dad is to protect first, provide second. So if I know this guy's bringing my daughter harm, I'm not thinking about the justice system at that point. So when I said that to him, he said, quick, you realize I have 5 other kids. So right now, if I was to do what you said, he said, everybody in my social media, you know, social media, if you see it on the internet, it's real. We believe in
Right.
shit for some reason. He said, so everybody right now is in my comments saying, I'm the dumb dad. I saw the show. Why didn't you break that door down and go through that window and take your daughter? And if you had to take your gun, he said, if I go right now and kill R. Kelly, it's no longer about my daughter. It's now, that's the guy who killed R. Kelly.
I do know that as parents, sometimes we can only do but so much. But I hope that this documentary on R. Kelly shows people that a parent's job is never done. You can't just assume that an adult will have your child's interest at their heart, because they won't. You have to make sure you're always around your children and you protect them with everything you have.
The majority of the time when you meet guys through social media. But do you ever have older guys try to creep into your DMs?
Yeah.
Not you, your friends.
Yeah.
Not you in particular.
I don't really know about my friends, but I know I've seen it before in mine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You ignore it.
They're like in my request though, because it's 2 parts too.
Yeah. Wait, so you know, like during the R. Kelly documentary, how they were saying that he would have his friends go to the mall and go pick up young girls, and then bring the young girls back to him. So like when you guys are at the mall, like you and your girlfriends, like the guys, like
I don't go to the mall.
You don't go to the mall, dang, mama.
I let you hang out.
Right.
Wait a minute, I let you hang out with your friends. This past Saturday, I let you go to a party, but I don't like to let her go to a lot of things because people are just crazy. I'm scared somebody might snatch her or.
Yeah. You share from your own personal experience that, I mean, you've had issues before when you were younger about guys, and not the best issues. Does it kind of, has it translated to her like you're a little bit more protective?
I am. You know, just recently, my daughter and I were asked to do the red table with Jada and her mom, and I was in a relationship that was like abusive, and you know, so I don't want my daughter to go through those things, and you know, we just kind of spoke up about it, and then I found out some things that, you know, about her that I didn't know, you know, with that. So it's like I am probably a little too overprotective, but you know, I have my reasons. You know, I've been through things. She's seen me go through things. So it's like I don't know what I would do if my child went through some of the things I've been through, and then also to deal with just like the whole R. Kelly thing, and you know, and then with that being said too, I'm just like, you know, he needs some help. Yeah. R. Kelly needs some help. You know, my ex when I went through that, he needed some help. You know, he said to me like, Chris, you know, I have a problem. Yeah, you do.
And so many times in the black community, we do that kind of protection discourse, and we can separate certain behaviors from others because we say that that's him, that's that, but that's not what we're doing right here. Right now, we're taking care of music. The part of your question speaks to responsibility. That is, what is our responsibility to not only the craft, but also to the community? And I think that that's a deeper question that we have to always ask, and that is the craft, the people that come together because it's just music. But if I'm still interacting with someone who is bad for the community, then as a result, I am perpetuating a pathology in the community, which then means that I'm not doing my community much good. And so I'm benefiting from the craft, but in reality, I'm destroying the community in which my craft is gaining some level of agency. So we have to force all of our individuals to challenge themselves to think about who you're really spending your time with.
With R. Kelly right now, right? People couldn't, they say, for me, not even for me, I've heard the conversation for people, they could separate Bill Cosby and Philip Huxtable. Because Philip Huxtable was the character, they still like the character, it's not Bill Cosby. Their heart is with Philip Huxtable, not Bill Cosby. Can you separate R. Kelly and the music?
I can't, but I had that same argument on my show because people made that same analogy, and I said, this is the gift of curse of bringing in entertainment as an actor or a singer or something like that, because what happens is, the same way you still love the character of Bill Cosby, it can be another character that you fall in love with on TV that you hate because you think that he or she is a villain. And then when you meet him in real life, you ever watch a movie you hated somebody so bad? I remember, what's my guy, Lawrence Fishburne said when he played Ike Turner on What's Love Got to Do. He said,
I'm glad you got Ike Turner right. I said Phil
so I got you.
I'm
So,
glad Larry didn't get me on that.
I got you. So, but he said when I played Ike Turner, that was the worst year of my life because I did such an amazing job acting as Ike Turner that people would see me in the streets and hate me. They would see me and cuss me out. He said I was somewhere and somebody was throwing stuff at me like, how could you do that to her? He like, Tina Turner, like I was acting. So that's the gift and the curse of being in that business. But however, I can't separate because this is me personally. I love R. Kelly's music to this day. I can go down the catalog of songs that if it came on right now, I would try my hardest not to hit my foot and sing it. But as a dad and as a man, I can't respect him anymore. So for that reason, I can't separate.
So not only do you still play his music?
No, not at all.
Not even if they paid you for the party.
Period.
Sorry, Jeff.
I don't need the money. I've never played an R. Kelly record since the documentary.
So if the mother of the bride came and said, "Can you play Step in the Name of Love right now?"
Absolutely not. I'm sorry, man. I'll get you another DJ. I have a slew of DJs that work for me. I can send you one. I know I can't.
Gotcha. Go ahead, Jeff. I'm sorry.
But because I think it's an important question, right? And a lot of us are talking about it. But so when I think about Miles Davis beating Cicely Tyson's ass, I don't hear his music as a soundtrack to beating her ass. When I think about Heathcliff Huxtable, he wasn't drugging chicks on the Cosby Show. He wasn't doing that with Fat Albert. He wasn't doing that with Little Bill. R. Kelly's music was a soundtrack to the damn abuse. And so I'm confused about separating, and I get that there are 3 songs or 4 songs that were the anomaly. But the vast catalog was like, yo, let me show you how I do this. And so for me, right. So
people separate the art from the artist when it's convenient, but they definitely got their picks and choices.
Yeah, so I guess with Cosby, it's a conflict for me because Heathcliff Huxtable never did what Bill did. And R. Kelly did everything he said. And so for me, that's why. How do you separate the two?
Can you separate it?
Yeah, I can separate it.
So you can still listen to R. Kelly, but not like him because of what he did?
What I mean by the separation is the difference because Quick is in the music business, you know what I mean? So what he plays or what he plays on the station, that's his persona, you know what I mean? From an R. Kelly fan, it's like, it's very hard, you know what I mean? If the Fiesta video come on, you're gonna think more of Jay-Z than you're gonna think of R. Kelly. If Nas came on with the R. Kelly remix, you're gonna think of Nas song more than R. Kelly singing a hook. I think it's a time and process. I think the songs that we think about when R. Kelly's singing about sex and this and that, or if it's the Leah song where he produced, that's out.
So
it's
you say
deleted.
you can keep the happy stuff, but get rid of the bad
It's a process. That's why you gotta be real with yourself, though. You have to be real with yourself.
So all of us here abandoning R. Kelly. None of us are listening to it anymore at any of our events. Persian, you're not playing it on the radio anymore. But how do we feel about the people who continue to work with him? Lady Gaga said no more. All these people stood up and said they would never.
Because he wrote a lot of songs for them.
Yeah.
I you know what? I applaud them for speaking up now, but I also am side-eyeing the folks who knew everything all along. And it took for them to come out with a documentary for them to say, "Oh no, we're not talking to him no more. We're not going to play any of his music, and also we're not going to perform any of his music." Now these are the folks who knew all this stuff. Like Lady Gaga knew when she made the record.
Already made the money.
She made that record
knew
like last week.
That's what I'm saying. So she knew what it was, but it took for this. So you know what? I think now everybody's woke up a little bit. So I can just say the people who did not speak up, like, they got to do better. And those are the people that we have to also side eye because they probably did the same things that he was doing. We just don't have it on tape.
Right. Here you
Like,
go.
and video don't lie.
Yeah. Everything in the dark comes to the light.
Yeah.
I think that we all had an idea of what he was doing and what was going on, but the documentary just really made us just see it. Like, oh my God, like this is really bad.
Undeniable.
Yes, like, okay, we can't ignore it anymore. And that's when more people
started to say, okay, we can't work with him anymore.
Yeah.
But at first it was like, oh, you did it, maybe, I don't know. But now to actually see the victims and hear their stories, it's like, okay, this is real.
We knew about it when the video came out years ago.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
And then
What was like, you never liked R. Kelly, so you was like, he's been canceled forever for you. Even though
So when he graduating, and he had to sing that song. I didn't want to sing that song. I knew I couldn't fly, so why would I can't sing the song?
But it's like, you know, I don't know.
I hated it. I never
She said,
I'm
"I'm a walk."
I want to walk. I know I can't fly. And I just hated the song. I really hate, I just not a fan. I'm sorry.
You didn't like I Believe I Can Fly?
No, I don't know either.
I just don't know.
No.
He had a lead of things that just wasn't gonna happen.
No. But there were articles too, and I feel like that was another thing that, you know, it would like re-up my hate for him, is because I would read these articles where, you know, every couple of years you would hear more and more and more and more.
Sure.
So I like that, at least with this documentary, is all strung together.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I was always getting piece by piece by piece because I did a morning radio show. And so when I was doing that, like I was more so immersed in this. And so I would just read this. I was like, how is he still walking around?
Why does it always take so much? Like even here with Bill Cosby, there were dozens of women that came forward. R. Kelly, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I mean,
Money
reached
and
so
fame.
many women.
Money
It takes
and
like
fame.
it's almost like it has to
Because when
become
people are making
undeniable.
money off of you, the machine does not want to see you fail.
Yeah.
So now we probably will see R. Kelly go to trial because he got dropped from his label.
There you go.
And the machine is like, oh, you're not making me any money?
Absolutely.
Well, sorry.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
and the same thing with Bill Cosby.
Right. I think when it came out before with the tape and everything, we weren't so engaged in. I don't even think social media probably existed.
Right.
Now,
No.
now
Yeah.
you can take a video and put it out there and it
Right.
goes viral
Right.
in less than 1 minute.
Yeah.
And so many people see this. So it's not. So let's say you put it on years ago. They would put it on the news and it would take time and it would just die down. But
Right.
now it's just it goes viral and it's just
It's
it's going here. And it's
Yeah.
just like it's hard for it to just go away. And I
And then
think
people trying to download it and they wait for their startup.
Yeah.
And the internet is not connected.
So in this room, we're saying collectively, we meet R. Kelly. We're done.
Oh,
Yeah.
We're done.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Never
Hashtag mute R. Kelly.
I'm sorry, because we know you've never believed you could fly.
I've never played R. Kelly, I don't think. Have I ever?
Tell us, Selena.
She'll tell you.
I
I play Beyonce all the time.
Well, who knows?
She
Who
sing
knows?
up Beyonce.
I play R. Kelly and I'm mad because I get married next year and I was.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
It came on in the car. Step in the Name of Love came
Yeah.
on one day.
Girl, change the
And
song.
I was so mad at him. I'm like, I can't even step in the Name of
Do the
Love
Cupid
anymore.
shuffle. You can do the Cupid shuffle now.
That's what we're gonna do. Right.
Do you feel differently? And I'll leave with this. When you talked about R. Kelly, right? We talked about, can you separate the man and music? Do you view the people that did music with him after that differently after this? Or do you compartmentalize it and say, oh, that's just R. Kelly?
I know what's on your mind. You like Jigga,
After-
Kelly, not guilty.
After the documentary,
Because they actually had an insider's view that we probably didn't have. A lot of the people in the industry already knew.
But they already knew.
Chance the
MO
Rapper.
was.
DMX said that he actually saw R. Kelly
Tamir
in the
went on
studio
tour with
with
him,
a young
and the
girl.
thing, like, do you look at those people now? Do your perspective of them has it changed?
that's a good question, and I'm gonna say honestly, Jay-Z being one. Jay-Z is one of my favorite people and rappers. Period. Do I look at Jay-Z differently now? They had an album, Best of Both Worlds, together. I don't, because I honestly believe, and I could be wrong, I honestly don't think all those people knew all the demons. I think we all heard the rumors, and we all started speculation. Was Jay-Z in the room with him when he was banging or peeing on a 13-year-old? I don't believe so. Was Jay-Z one of the guys who put a room in his name? Because R. Kelly wasn't flying these girls out under Robert Kelly, putting them in a hotel under Robert Kelly. Was Jay-Z involved in that? I don't think so. He might have. I don't have proof that he was. Now, if something came out that on the Best of Both Worlds tour, they were having threesomes with 13-year-olds, and some proof came out that it was real, at that point, I would never look at Jay-Z the same anymore. But right now, all we have is I can't even say speculation because I don't know if these
You don't know
people.
what they
I
knew.
don't know what they knew. I know for a
Because
fact.
just
So
as
if I give you,
ignorant as
I
we
give you a
were,
prime example
just
right
as
now.
ignorant as we were, they
Right
were
now,
ignorant.
all of us, you know me for 25 years, and you've known me. You've been in my house. I've been to your house. We know each other's family and kids. But there's still certain things about my life that you don't know. There's certain things in my life. I've known Jeff. We've been in the industry and been panels decades. But there's certain things about Jeff I know I don't know. I know Biddy. I done bought stuff from him. But it's Larry Land. He done performed in my club. But there's stuff about him I know I don't know. So if something came out right now that Larry Lancaster is a pedophile, and Quicksilver booked him, but listen, but I'm saying, but Quicksilver booked him at his club. That means that Quicksilver, he booked him at his club, so he's just as guilty. I didn't know that. I thought the brother was funny. I don't know that. I don't know that Jeff in his spare time likes to actually look at child porn. I don't know that. I've never been in a position where I would. So if it came out, am I guilty by association because Jeff's my friend?
Don't let that be the sound bite.
No, I'm saying, Jeff don't like porn, y'all. He don't like child pornography.
in those terms until you pose the question.
Because I don't know.
I'll say this. I think that's a really good question, but I think it's the question that damns all of us. And I think that there was enough out about R. Kelly for people of conscience not to do business with him. But he made money. And people looked the other way to make the money. Just like a lot of us look the other way to listen to the music. And that is, I think, what really is the point. So many of us look the other way to do the shit we liked at the cost of lives and families and futures. And if any of us are going to be different, I don't think the question is, do we demonize Jay or do we demonize Lady Gaga or do we demonize Chance? The question is, will we stop looking the other way for convenience and profit? And if we aren't willing to do that, how the hell can we demonize somebody else?
So Jeff, do you honestly think Michael Jackson knew You Were Not Alone was about him raping the girl and her having the
I don't think Michael Jackson knew much about shit.
That's my point. We don't know this stuff.
See, the genius of Western civilization is creating an artificial morality play out of culture and then hiding itself as the villain of the piece. Never forget that we go to school and learn a curriculum, a Western-style curriculum, where some of the most heinous acts in human history are valorized as acts of heroism. Our children read about Oedipus, a man that killed his father and slept with his mother. He met a tragedy. That's a Greek tragedy, brother. They read Romeo and Juliet. These are two teenagers defying their families. So by the time you layer over all this Western pathology, read about Zeus taking Hera from behind, or King Lear, or Richard III. I mean, this is the definition of misogyny. So then when you then enslave a bunch of people, strip them of their cultural values and insert that type of pathology, you're bound to wound up with something like, I don't know, R. Kelly.
I think we have to be very clear. When it comes to people of color, especially Black people, we have to really think critically and deeply about who and what we celebrate. You can't sit here and condemn Robert Kelly for his actions when there's music that continues to serve as a tool and a vehicle for misogyny. You can't sit here and say, yes, what Robert Kelly did was wrong, but then there's music that continues to prey on women. So as a culture, I think we need to have a deeper and a larger conversation about our expectations from our artists. What do we choose to celebrate? Whom do we choose to celebrate? Because while Robert Kelly did something that is completely vile and vicious, there are lyrics that are doing things to the mental capacity of our youth that are vile and vicious. And how are we holding those people accountable?
I'm here to talk to the fellas, man. We're gonna get the bottom of the situation about this R. Kelly talking about this and that.
She came through and blessed us with her knowledge, her wisdom. She lent us all those school years of education and finances.
Hi. How are you? Thanks, girl. Hair's cute.
What's up, fellas?
What's up, bro?
This is why crime was down tonight, huh?
This is 7 o'clock p.m. appointment for the man weave.
Hey, Jess, you got a man weave.
I'm here for a nose hair plan. I'm getting old, gotta get the hair on my ears and nose and all that.
Yo, the man weave is crazy, man.
Man
That's
weave is
crazy,
crazy, man.
Certain
Yeah.
things we have to, as men bow out on, say it's not for us.
Yeah,
It's
man.
not for us.
I can't sanction the man weave, son.
My God.
My name is Jan Desper Peters, and I'm the Executive Director of the Black Mental Health Alliance. And I just want to thank BTST Services for coming to us and Kaiser Permanente for this opportunity tonight. We do, as Chris said as well, have monthly shop talks in 3 West Baltimore shops. And we hope that you will come out to those as well. So without further ado, I'd like my panel to join me. First, I want to introduce Mr. William Killebrew. William's story is one of resilience and hope. Come on, William. Killebrew has bounced back from tragedy and now crusades the world on a passionate mission to make a difference in the lives of others with a special focus on safety, protection, wellness of children, youth, and families. The next person I'd like to ask to come to the stage to join me is Dr. Patricia Newton, affectionately known as Nana. Dr. Newton is a psychiatrist. She's a behavioral scientist, healer, author, activist, and the executive director and medical director of the Black Psychiatrists of America. The next person I'd like to ask to come to the stage is Mr. Jeff Johnson. You saw him in the film. Jeff is the award-winning journalist and communications specialist and is currently managing principal for the Baltimore-based strategy firm JIJ Communications. He also will host and executive produce Man Cave, a late-night talk show targeting urban men airing on BET. And last but certainly not least, Ms. Jada McCray, the other half of the dynamic duo at BTST Services. Jada has owned and owns several companies and is COO and executive director and all these other kinds of things. But the one thing that she always says when she introduces herself is, I'm from Baltimore. And she does, and she is a great, great person. So it's, I just wanted to share a couple of statistics before we kind of dive in. So child sexual abuse is a widespread problem, of course. And according to the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, RAINN, every 11 minutes, Child Protective Services substantiates or finds evidence for a claim of child sexual abuse. In Maryland, a child is reported abused or neglected every 10 minutes. 1 in 6 men are sexually molested as a child. Many times we talk about women, but men are also in the numbers as well. The issue of sexual exploitation is much bigger than an R. Kelly or a Michael Jackson or even a Bill Cosby. And so quiet as it's kept, and the pun is intended, sexual abuse is happening in our families, on sports teams, and even in our church. There's no smooth on-ramp, so let's just get it in. William, one of the reasons that I asked you to be on the panel is because you've spoken for us at the Black Mental Health Alliance, and you so readily shared your story and how that motivated you to do this work for your life's work. Please share with us your story and how that then influenced you to work in this field.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you. What a wonderful film tonight. So just give everybody a round of applause who was part of that work today. I think that it brings to light so many of the issues that we are challenged with on a daily basis in our society. And thank you, Jan, for the invitation. You know, I always think about this quote that trust is the first casualty of early abuse. It goes out the window first. And if trust is broken, isn't it the cornerstone of relationships? Healthy relationships? And, you know, my life's work, and I always talk about this, that, you know, healing, just number one, healing is possible, by the way. And so I want to talk about the positive piece of this, that healing is possible from sexual abuse, from witnessing violence, from all of the things that we are faced tragically in our communities, that healing is possible, and healing is the ultimate piece and where we want to get to. Ongoing healing, because that is a process, right? Jan talked about my story, and you know, full disclosure, I'm director for the Office of Youth and Trauma Services here at the Baltimore City Health Department, and I oversee our public health approach to addressing trauma in this city. And you may not see me often because we're really focused in the office, really focused with our teams, because we have a lot of our team members out in communities. And so, you know, I come from that brand of working in communities, and I'm from D.C.
Oh, well.
But my mother was born here in 1954. My grandmother lived here in the 50s. And my grandfather slapped my mom when she was just an infant. And my grandmother fled to D.C. To build a life for our family. But tragically, 30 years later, my mother would be murdered at 30 years old in Capitol Heights, Maryland, and with my brother, who was 12 years old. And that happened on July 2nd, 1984. And on that day was also the day that I witnessed her murders. I witnessed my brother being murdered, who was to the right of me, my mom being murdered by her ex-boyfriend, who basically said, if I can't have you, nobody else can. But as a 10-year-old, I got up out of that seat when I was released from being held hostage that morning, and I walked out of that room. And I will tell you something, listening to this film today, it really brought up some memories for me, because, you know, we're talking about the situation with R. Kelly and the music, but one of the things that's stripped from children is their dignity. The respect for human beings, not just black people, not just whites, not purple people, but the human being. Trauma disrupts a sense of humanity. And it's important for us to bring humanity back into the space with these kinds of conversations. And I had to go to school to the 5th grade that year. Disruption of the connection of my mom, who was literally my best friend as a 10-year-old. I was still getting groomed. She was still teaching me how to clean my ears, still washing me up at 10 years old. Who knows a 10-year-old? Still clingy, right? Real clingy and very smart. I certainly know what a gun is, and if I didn't know what it was that morning, I experienced the harsh reality of watching it that morning. But you know something? With that situation that happened in 1984, this also brought up some memories for me, because at the age of 6, I was also sexually assaulted by my mom's friend and neighbor, another trusted adult. And that means that these kinds of terroristic assaults are compounding. That often our kids are facing these situations, and I faced it growing up, and it was tragic for me growing up. And so I ended up on the bridge one day at age 13, after no therapy for 10 years in elementary school, going to junior high. My grandmother said, you know, let's just forget about it. That was our strategy in our black household. Just forget about it. Pack the clothes away, pack the pictures away, and just keep going. Don't worry about it, and go to school. And so, you know, one of the things I'll say is that oftentimes, you know, experts say that kids under 10 years old, their number one or most common coping strategy is what? Anybody? Dissociation. Yeah, going off into la la land. And that's what I did. I went off to La La Land. But what happens to kids when they go off into La La Land when a teacher is teaching a lesson? Disciplined. And so the last thing I'll say, Jan, according to what I'm talking about, just a real tool that we can take away from here, is that I was consequenced, but I want to say that all behavior has meaning. When we judge behavior first and act on behavior, we can miss the meaning behind behavior. Behavior offers us an opportunity for understanding if we're lucky. Behavior or meaning offers us an understanding or maybe some reason or something that happens, but it's not an excuse for behavior. So nobody has the right to actually abuse children or abuse anybody else. Let me get that straight. So for R. Kelly, he is not off the hook. No matter how long we think about his circle or what's going on, somebody actually did the act. And it's R. Kelly who is placed in this situation, but there are other people who are responsible too. But let's remember who's taking these kids and who's getting these kids and these young people out. But the last thing I'll say is when we consequence a behavior, as I was consequenced in junior high school and made to write, I will pay attention on the board. One of the things my teacher didn't understand were the images that I was coming to school with. So when we consequence behavior, we should ask this one question I want you to take away with you tonight. When the next time you think about your kid and they come home with an F because they got failure, not knowing that their F meant an A because it was their best effort, I want you to ask the question, what are we consequencing? Because we could be consequencing a survival strategy of our kids surviving every single day. Not let off the hook, but certainly acknowledging, let's take a step back and think about what we're consequencing the next time we think about consequencing somebody for their behavior first. Right. Let's get the meaning behind behavior.
Thank you. So, William, you're talking, you're speaking specifically to a trauma-informed activity, especially when in the trauma-informed model, we're not asking children or anyone what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And so that analogy you use with the F really being an A is a great one. Nana, please share with us, because you're internationally known, a lecturer, author, presenter, especially around youth trauma and sex trafficking. And so could you just share with us some of the things that you see or have seen in your practice with children who have experienced trauma?
And adults too.
And adults.
So let me take a minute to tell you that that's a wonderful story. And secondly, to say that we as a community are in denial about the level of pathology and trauma, but we are also victims, and we are dealing with complex, compound historical trauma. And we have to understand that our brains have been conditioned over time to make adjustments, make these compensatory adjustments that are not necessarily in our best interest, but are survival strategies for us to be able to cope with our current realities. What happens when we are traumatized, and I've looked at trauma across the board, and let me just say that way back when, anybody here remember the old Providence Hospital? Well, I used to be chair of psychiatry when it was in existence. And one of the things that we did way back in the 70s was take a look at every first-time admission to the emergency room, regardless of diagnosis, in Baltimore City. You know what we found out way back then? We found back that 9 out of every 10 African-American women and 7 out of every 10 African-American males in this city had been sexually traumatized. That makes it a public health problem. But one of the issues is that nobody asks. Nobody really wants to know. Our teachers are not trained. Many of our professionals and even our doctors don't ask because they can't cope with it either. And so part of what we're dealing with is a disinformed, misinformed, people who are traumatized themselves trying to treat traumatized people. That's a problem. And let me just say that what we're looking at is that when a person is traumatized, their brain does interesting things. It attempts to encapsulate that trauma to manage it. But there becomes a place where, like you said, disassociation, but then you begin to shut off the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe of the brain is your CEO. It's where you make your executive decisions. It's where you decide what's in your best interest and what is not. And oftentimes, children cannot articulate what happens to them any more than black people can articulate the trauma that they have experienced for over 400 years. And so what we did end up doing is telling everybody else's story but our own. And so our children can't tell it, they can't verbalize it, we can't make the decision, so we have these maladaptive coping mechanisms: substance abuse, drug abuse, prostitution, human trafficking, and there's no disconnect between that and early sexual trauma as well. And black people, black children, are more likely to be trafficked than any other group because nobody's going to arrest the people who perpetrate them. Because as Brother Carr said, we don't count. And you can take and only sell drugs once, but I can sell a human being over and over and over and over until I use them up. And so what we're dealing with is there's no safe place for our children. Our churches are not safe in many instances, no pun intended. Our homes are not safe, and our schools are not safe. So there's no place safe for our children to stand. And so part of the issue is that we're dealing with, and as many of you know, for the last 30 years, this has been my area. And we are in the process now of creating community centers where we are training people in the community to be able to recognize sexual trauma, sexual exploitation, and human trafficking, and to come out of this concept of denial, because you are not doing anything but perpetuating generation after generation of plague that was first imposed upon us by our enslavers. But now we have perfected it like we do anything. We get it better than anybody else. And now we've perfected it to a place where we're now perpetrating it up on ourselves. And yes, R. Kelly is a victim of sexual abuse, as most perpetrators are. Yes, he has to be held accountable. But at the same time, what about all of us who are complicit in our silence, who do nothing, who turn the other way, who because I want to share with you, if you all are available on Saturday, the 13th of April, I want you to come. Well, it does cost money, but we're going to be screening the film again, Wolf, which is about sex abuse in the black church. And we're bringing in Professor Yaki to talk about that. And you'll see in the movie where the grandmother doesn't want anybody to know that the pastor sexually abused her grandson because it makes the church look bad. And so what am I saying? I'm not talking about the church, so don't get me wrong, folk. Don't get offended. Dr. Newton is just dealing with the reality. The issue is that we have to stop shutting up. We have to stop this conspiracy of silence. We have to understand that we many times get paralyzed because some of us are suffering from those traumas from our own childhood, and we go revert back to that paralysis that we had as children where we were unable to take care of ourselves. You're grown, you don't have to take it, and it's time to stop it. And if you know somebody that needs help, I'm like the Amtrak. If you see something, say something.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Pat. Thank you. So I think that we, most, if not all of us, are of the belief that R. Kelly and people like him need to be held accountable. One of the things, Jada, that I hope that you can share with the audience tonight is you and Chris employ hundreds of providers, and I know that that you also provide training for them. And so with working with those providers and working with the parents and guardians that you work with, what are some of the things that you might share with them, as Dr. Pat said, in relationship to when you see a certain behavior that you may suspect some kind of child abuse?
It's listening. Listening is the best thing that you can do for a child, is to listen to them. Children come to us in all different packages, and they have all different kinds of behaviors, and we are quick to label children as ADHD or label something as depression or label it as anxiety disorder when it's actually PTSD. So I have many, many people who have come into my office I've done evaluations for, and it could be women who are 55, 60 years old, and they come to me because they're depressed and they have, this dysthymia, and they've been depressed for years and years and years, and it's unrelenting, and they don't understand why. And so we do an evaluation, and one of the first things we asked after we take some history was, is there any sexual abuse? Do you know how many times I've had people disclose to me, this is the first time that I'm telling anyone that this happened to me when I was 6 years old? So what they're doing is they're responding to the trauma that they've had. So like he said before, the problems that you see in schools, the problems that you see in the workplace, the people that you think are nasty, or she's always rude, or she's always mean, or she's defensive, or she's this and she's that, or she's promiscuous, and like we said up there, a hoe. All of these things, all of these labels that we have for us, ourselves, and our people, a lot of times there's trauma behind this. They are maladaptive behaviors, as we said earlier. And so we have to dig deeper and be willing to listen and not be afraid to confront the things that we have going on in our community, like child sexual abuse. Like you said, we have to watch the narrative as well, how people represent us. People who were chattel slavery, we were chattel slaves. So you know from the beginning that people were able to tell us who we are. Who are you? Do you know who you are? Or are you the hoe or the fussing lady on Love and Hip Hop or whatever? Who are you? Is that you? Is that representative of who you are? And is that how we see our women? Because until we let women have constitution over their own bodies and give them responsibility over their own bodies and teach and raise males to respect those bodies as well and see women as fully functioning human beings, it'll never change. And predators hide where prey is present. So if it is in church, if it is in school, if it is at the Little League game, those are the places that you need to watch. It's not the stranger. It's the person behind the door, the one that you let in. So those are the things that you need to be mindful of. Who am I allowing my child to be around? Who's watching my child? Who am I trusting around my child? And when your child shows behaviors, as you suggested before, when your child shows behaviors that's not quite them, if you've had a bubbly and sweet child before, and all of a sudden he's quiet and he's not saying anything, and a child who loves school and now he hates school, he can't focus, he can't concentrate, look deeper than ADHD. That's not always it. So be mindful of those things. These are the things that you want to watch out for. These are the signs and symptoms that you want to see. Ask questions about your children and then be willing to hear. Because one of the biggest issues that we have is that when children disclose what's really going on, you have parents who want to be in denial and not confront the issue because they don't want to upset the apple cart. Who further leave the door open for their children to be traumatized even further. So when you ask a question, be prepared to hear the answer and act on it.
Absolutely. Thank you. I remember when I was a child, my mother came to elementary school and we had these pictures up of who our hero or shero was. I don't think, I'm a little bit older than Chris and Jada, but they didn't call it shero. And my mother was amazed that I had drawn a picture of her. And when we talk about celebrity, Jeff, one of the most poignant points in the movie for me was when you talked about how R. Kelly he actualized his music. Like what he sung about was who he was and what he did. I was reading in the New York Times that Maureen Dowd wrote in reference to Michael Jackson that the celebrity superseded the criminality. And so I just wanted to have you share a little bit more about that and your thoughts around that, especially in an age where we have young people that, glorify and aggrandize people that aren't in their home when they really are the people that are providing for them.
Sure, there's a lot there. So first, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. I think the challenge before we talk about celebrity is, and it's been implied and in some cases said already, if I'm not going to challenge Uncle Charles, who is not a celebrity, but who is touching kids in the family, who doesn't have an album out, who doesn't have a movie out, that doesn't score any points. If I'm not going to challenge my mother's boyfriend, if I'm not going to challenge my aunt, then I'm not going to challenge people that I've deified. And so I think before we get to, if we create a practice of challenging the people closest to us, then we've built the muscle to challenge people that we've deified and we don't know. And we have, in our community, a problem challenging uncles and aunts and fathers and mothers and grandfathers and friends.
And preachers.
And preachers and teachers and coaches. And so all of those things are very real, and those are the people that we see every day. And so if that's the case, why would I challenge somebody who I have emotional investment in my fantasy? Because that's what entertainers are. I have emotionally invested in them creating fantasy for me. And if I've emotionally invested in them creating fantasy, that in many cases is part of my retreat from the trauma I'm already facing, why am I going to challenge and dismantle the very thing that protects me from the trauma I'm already facing? And so I just think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And while I applaud the work that Jada and Chris and others are doing, we as citizens, I think, need to challenge other folks to identify the proper resources for folks that can't afford or aren't covered by a grant. I run a strategic communications company, and one of my clients is the city of Cleveland. And the mayor, over the course of the last 2 years, has been incredibly deliberate about the notion of toxic stress and trauma as it relates to young people in the city of Cleveland. And so now every rec center has 2 professionals that have the ability to diagnose and to treat toxic stress and trauma. So no rec center in the city of Cleveland now is without that staff person. As long as the center is open, they are there. And it's not just for appointments, but it's for them to be able to assess when a kid is coming in, why they're acting the way they are. Are they different than they were yesterday? Am I seeing signs? Am I listening? And that's a bridge to them now placing people in schools in the city of Cleveland. Because most of our teachers, I just personally believe that I think we need to pass laws that ultimately say if you want to be a teacher, you need to have a minor in child psychology. No, seriously, because if you don't, then you're automatically missing. We are asking teachers to do way too much. And when you aren't even given the skills to be able to assess and have a level of emotional intelligence about the babies that are coming in your classroom, pedagogy is second to emotional well-being. And so I think, we're talking about things that we can do as families and individuals, but there's some legitimate policy work we need to do and engagement that we need to do that if we don't do it, then we're overwhelming mental health professionals who don't have the bandwidth to reach as many people as they do, and in some cases still making it even an elitist service or a service that is only provided by other elite people that create grants for people that don't have the money to be able to get it. Either way, there's too much of a gap between the people that need the service and the people that need professionals in their ecosystem that just don't have it.
So we have a couple of questions from the audience, and I just want you all to know that they gave me a lot of things to do up here. I got a lot of devices, and the questions are coming in on my text, so I'm not reading the text from my husband, okay? I'm just letting you know. So one of the questions is, and anyone who feels comfortable answering can answer, how do we bridge the difficult conversation with parents about how to talk with children about safety and the dangers without scaring them and causing them to be afraid of adults in the community?
So I've had this question before when I was on the radio, and one of the things that I always encourage parents to do is have age-appropriate conversations with your children and not shy away from conversations, because what you don't talk about, they'll make up the difference in their own minds anyway. So you need to have really very, very early on. I have 2 small children, and when he said something about little boys at the age of 10, it kind of broke my heart, because I have a big 10-year-old puppy at home, and when I say that, I'm talking about my son. Yeah. And so from the very beginning with my children, and this is a social work thing, I was always very, very clear about making sure they felt comfortable with their own bodies. And I don't make them hug, kiss, or greet anyone that they don't want to, ever, ever. So your body is your own. And you know this, if you sit too closely to someone on the subway, everybody kind of scooches just a little bit. And so you want to let children know that their bodies are their own as well. So I don't own my children. I don't own my children's bodies. I'm their parent and their guardian, and I'm their protector. But that's rule number 1, because if we can identify that we don't own our children, then we also understand that other people don't own our children as well. They own themselves, and they have control over their own bodies. That's rule number one. So having those conversations with your children, not just about good touch, bad touch, but did anybody do anything that made you feel uncomfortable? And then exploring what is that discomfort. If someone that I have a feeling about hugged me in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable, maybe that's something that needs to be explored. Also, talking to your children about when you have someone watch over them or sit them, when they're leaving, don't ask, were you good? In front of the person that just cared for them. You want to give them space and time to kind of debrief how they feel. Again, I understand I'm a therapist, so my children can tell you how they feel and what they need to do to cope at any given moment. But we need to make that part of the everyday conversation of how do your children feel? What are they thinking? What is their experience in the world? And it will help you to better understand how to communicate with them as well. And not just this, but talking to them about their everyday, because not everything is sexual abuse and sexual assault. Sometimes children just, when you send your children to school, you send them with strangers all day long. What is the conversation that you're having with your children? Don't just stop at how was school today. Dig a little bit deeper. Well, you went to gym? Well, what did you guys do in gym? Well, how did you feel about it? What did the other kids do? And I got all the tea on kindergarten. Everybody in kindergarten, I know all the tea about what's going on. Like, what? Melody did what? You know? So that you're having these open and honest conversations, and don't shy away from it. And when they ask questions that make you feel uncomfortable, you ask yourself, why do I feel uncomfortable about this? And then answer with truth. Do not lie, because they'll remember.
I think in addition to what you brought up is so important, I think that when Jeff, you were speaking, I thought about this, that our values and beliefs drive our decision making, our actions, and our behavior. So what we say, what we do, how we behave can be directly linked to what we value and believe. But I think about like a 5-year-old kid who's growing up in a home whose parent whose job is to keep danger away from the home, who's to really protect the kid in the home. But what if that parent is also the abuser? What if that parent, it goes back to what you're saying, Doc, what if the parent is also the abuser? How does a child recognize danger signs when the danger and non-danger has been skewed? That is one of the key things I think about. How does the internal warning signs and red flags go off when the danger has been presented as safe? So we, I think, in our important roles as teachers who do have that, we may not have had some psychology, but maybe we have some common sense, a little bit of common sense to think, let's recognize the signs, let's respond to it appropriately, and let's refer it over to the authorities, and let's actually model what decent, healthy behavior actually looks like. And so you're modeling excellent behavior from a parent, and I think about those kids don't have those models inside. So we, on the outside of those homes or outside of those schools and those daycare centers, we have a responsibility in our role to model what safety looks like. So that kid can actually have something to compare that to. Wow, because some kids don't even know they're being sexually abused, have no clue that that's sexual abuse, because they don't have the language and the cognitive skills to be able to bring that to the forefront.
We have time for one more question, but that was a great point in relationship to children not having the language and being taught to have the language so they can have those conversations. Right, by trusted adults, exactly. Okay, last question. I adopted a young girl who has been sexually abused and has been acting out. She goes to therapy, but it doesn't seem to curb her behavior. Here you go, Doc. What can I do to help her?
Run, no. There are a number of issues. First of all, I think his point is well taken. There still may be some trust issues. Even though you have adopted this child and shown this child love and support, that may not have been that child's experience. And so some of this is testing behavior to make sure that you are who you say you are and validating. The other issue that has to be addressed is some children learn early on that they can manipulate and they can get things and be awarded things when they manipulate. And maybe that's how that child survived when they were sexually abused before. So we have to look at a number of variables. It's not a straight issue. And then thirdly, are there other things in the environment? Are there other people in the environment that may be triggering some memories or things that happened to that person, to that child, that they are now reflecting? But more importantly, love is important. an unconditional love that is safe, that is protective, and that is supportive. And as long as you continue to demonstrate that, children grow up, and as they grow up, they grow out of some of this craziness that we have to deal with when we're dealing with them. But I think if you continue to get the child therapy, but you also got to look at who's doing the therapy and what kind of therapy they're delivering, because a lot of this therapy is not, how can I say this and be gentle?
Speak.
It's not culturally competent. There you go. It's not culturally competent, and it's not relevant. And many of the values that certain therapists hold may not be the same constructs that are in your family, and may not be relevant in terms of the dynamics that black folk have. I'll give you a classic example before we end. I had a parent who was taken before social services because there was a gentleman making sexual advances to this child. And the parent stepped to the gentleman. Finally, the child stepped to the gentleman and told him what he would or would not do if he continued. So the child was already in therapy, and because there was a dysfunction between the mother and the father, the worker that came into the home was not of the same cultural persuasion and felt that the father's aggression was inappropriate. And then began to put sanctions on the amount of visiting, because the parents were not together, that child could have with the father. And I'm like, wait a minute. So I wrote the letter and explained the cultural reality that a black man does not want, if he's a true father, anybody messing with his kid. And that they're going to take you out and or take you up, one or the other. So I mean, but we had to go to court. We literally had to go to court to get this man's parental rights reinstituted at the same level of visitation that they were before. So you got to be careful sometimes who is you have your children in therapy with. So let me just say that and stop.
Thank you. Yes. So, of course, JD, you have the last word.
I'm sorry. So I just want to add to that. When we talk about cultural competence, we know that at BTSD, whenever we're trying to hire a Spanish-speaking therapist, we always ask, are you a native Spanish speaker? Because you can be taught a language, you can be taught a culture, but there are nuances when you are part of the culture that can't be explained. And so what you're speaking to is that. So we have to make sure that we're supporting African-American and black therapists in becoming therapists and treating our people. At the time of Freddie Gray, I was working for an agency that was not owned by African-American people. And I remember a lot of the therapists there who were black, myself included, were really disheartened by what was going on in West Baltimore. And we were upset about it because these were populations that we served for years, and it is us. And I walked into the CEO's office, and I heard her son say, the TV was on, there go those people again. Because black people were rioting. That stuck with me, and I remembered hearing that, and a light bulb switched in my head. I said, I am those people. These are my people, and I need to do everything in my power to help those people. Shortly thereafter, I met Chris Simon, and the rest is history. So there are us who understand the history, and we are here, and we get it, and we know that we have to help ourselves. And so we're here to service us and the trauma that we've been through collectively as a black culture. What we've endured through chattel slavery and Jim Crow and segregation and the constant barrage of things that you see on social media. So we're here to help us out of those things. Because believe me, we're not bullheaded and stiff-necked and unruly like you would have us believe we are. We're traumatized people trying to work through that trauma. So those of us who've worked through that trauma must stand firm and help the others. And this helps what starts with our children.
Amen.
And build on our strengths because we are very resilient.
And hold our politicians accountable.
And explain to other people what a cousin really is, because they don't get that cousins aren't necessarily related by blood, but just as important.
Or even aunts.
I'm just saying.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. All right. We could go on and on all night. I'm trying to get to my last thing here. I told you they gave me too many devices. Okay. Silence allows more abuse to occur. Speak up. Report suspected child sexual abuse in Baltimore by dialing 911 or Baltimore City Police for the police, or for Baltimore City Child Protective Services, For referrals to therapists, you can contact, I have to, like Chris, have a commercial for the Black Mental Health Alliance. You can contact the Black Mental Health Alliance and access our referral services at 410-338-2642. I'd like 410-338-2642. I too would like to thank my wonderful, wonderful staff for being here and the wonderful partnership we have with Kaiser Permanente for our Mind Health Shop Talks. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jada, for allowing us to be a part of this. And please help me thank my panel.